The wedding venue was perfect. White roses, string lights, 150 empty chairs. My father's text came 10 minutes before I walked down the aisle. A teacher making $48,000 isn't family. Don't contact us again. 7 years later, when my sister begged me for money, I finally understood what family really means. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 25, I was the girl who had everything but wanted something real. You have to understand, growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut wasn't just about having money, it was about displaying it like a badge of honor. Our estate had 16 bedrooms for a family of 4. The garage housed 7 cars we barely drove. My mother collected Hermes bags like some people collect coffee mugs, storing them in a climate-controlled closet bigger than most New York apartments. But while my family counted stock options, I counted the days until Monday morning when I could see my third graders again. I'd discovered teaching almost by accident, volunteering for a literacy program my senior year at Yale to pad my resume for law school applications. The moment 8-year-old Marcus finally sounded out the word butterfly after weeks of struggling, something shifted inside me. His joy was pure, earned, real. Nothing in my trust fund life had ever felt that authentic. The decision to teach at PS 47 in the Bronx sent shockwaves through the Mitchell family dynasty. The school was exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes from our Greenwich mansion, but it might as well have been on another planet. The hallways smelled like industrial cleaner and cafeteria food instead of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. The windows were barred. Half the ceiling tiles were water-stained. My classroom's heating worked sporadically, and I learned to keep fingerless gloves in my desk drawer for particularly cold January mornings. My students became my world. There was Jaden, who came to school an hour early because it was the only place he could get breakfast. Maria, whose parents worked 3 jobs but still showed up to every parent-teacher conference with proud smiles and questions about how they could help at home. Deshawn, brilliant at math but convinced he was stupid because no one had ever told him otherwise. These kids didn't need my family's money. They needed someone to believe in them. I spent my own money constantly. $2,000 on classroom supplies in September. Another $1,000 on winter coats in November when I noticed kids shivering through lessons. $500 on books for our classroom library because the district's budget gave me exactly $12 per student for the entire year. My mother would spend more than that on a single lunch at Bergdorf's, discussing charity galas where rich people congratulated themselves for helping the less fortunate, while never actually meeting any of them. Every evening, I'd come home to my tiny studio apartment in Washington Heights, a place my family had never visited because that neighborhood isn't safe, darling, and spend hours creating lesson plans. I'd laminate flashcards while eating 99-cent ramen, design creative worksheets on my ancient laptop, research new teaching methods on YouTube. My Yale classmates were making 6 figures at consulting firms, and there I was, calculating if I could afford both groceries and new markers this week. But God, I was happy. Happier than I'd ever been sitting at charity galas or shopping on Fifth Avenue. My students called me Miss M and drew me pictures that I treasured more than any artwork in my parents' collection. They'd hug me with sticky hands and tell me secrets and trust me with their dreams. When Jaden's reading level jumped 2 grades, I cried in my car. When Maria won the district spelling bee, I cheered louder than her own family. When Deshawn started calling himself smart, I knew I'd found my purpose. This was who I was when James walked into my life, not the Mitchell heiress, but Miss M, the teacher who believed love could change everything. Before everything fell apart, Sunday dinners at my parents' colonial mansion were sacred rituals of perfection. The dining room could have been a museum exhibit, 18th century mahogany table, crystal chandelier from Prague, oil paintings of stern-faced Mitchell ancestors watching us eat. Every Sunday at precisely 6 o'clock, we'd gather like actors taking our places for a performance we'd rehearsed since childhood. My father would sit at the head, carving the roast with surgical precision while discussing quarterly earnings as casually as weather. Charles Mitchell III commanded every room he entered, his silver hair and sharp jaw making him look like he'd been cast for the role of powerful patriarch. He'd built the hedge fund from nothing, or so he claimed, conveniently forgetting the $10 million loan from his father that started it all. To him, success was the only morality that mattered. My mother, Eleanor, would orchestrate these dinners like a conductor leading a symphony. Every fork exactly 1 inch from the plate edge, every wine glass filled to precisely the same level, every napkin folded into perfect triangles. She'd float between kitchen and dining room in her St. John suits, pearls catching the light, ensuring the staff, yes, we had staff for Sunday dinners, executed her vision flawlessly. She'd been a museum curator before marrying my father, and now she curated our family's image with the same obsessive attention to detail. Victoria would sweep in fashionably late, always making an entrance in whatever designer dress she'd bought that week. My older sister had perfected the art of being everything our parents wanted. Married to Richard Blackstone, whose family owned half of Manhattan's commercial real estate, living in a brownstone that regularly appeared in Architectural Digest, raising their daughter Sophie with a full-time nanny and plans for Swiss boarding school by age 10. Victoria would air-kiss everyone, complain about the traffic from the Hamptons, and launch into stories about her latest charity committee triumph. The conversation followed a predictable script: market analysis from father, guest lists for upcoming galas from mother, Victoria's elaborate renovations or European vacation plans, Richard's latest acquisition or golf club victory. They'd discuss people I didn't know, buying things I didn't care about in places I'd never been, the mayor's wife's scandalous divorce, the Vanderbilt heir's drug problem, who was invited to whose yacht for the 4th of July. When I tried to share my world, the silence was deafening. I'd mention how Jaden had started reading chapter books, how we'd turned our classroom into a rainforest for our science unit, how Maria's mother had brought homemade tamales for our Cultural Heritage Day. My mother would pause, her fork suspended midway to her mouth, then delicately change the subject. Victoria, tell us about the Met Gala committee. Will you be chairing again this year? But there was another part of my normal life they knew nothing about. Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the Grounded Bean, a coffee shop halfway between PS 47 and Washington Heights. It had mismatched chairs, walls covered in local artists' work, and the best lavender latte in the city for $3. That's where I first saw James, sitting in the corner grading papers with such intensity that he didn't notice his coffee had gone cold. Our first conversation happened by accident. I'd tripped over someone's backpack, sending my stack of student essays flying and my coffee splashing across his table. Instead of anger, he'd laughed, a deep, genuine laugh, and spent the next 20 minutes helping me reorder pages while making jokes about how his students' handwriting looked like drunk spiders learning cursive. James taught history at the high school 2 blocks from my elementary school. He knew exactly what it meant to buy supplies with your grocery money, to take work home every night, to care more about kids than test scores. We started meeting regularly, supposedly to share teaching strategies, but strategy sessions turned into life stories over reheated coffee and shared pastries. James had grown up in foster care, bouncing between 15 homes before aging out at 18. He'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, then transferred to State University, graduating with honors despite sleeping in his car junior year. Teaching wasn't just a job for him. It was his way of being the stable adult he'd never had. This beautiful, parallel life existed completely separate from Sunday dinners. In one world, I was the disappointing daughter, who'd thrown away her Yale education. In the other, I was Miss M, falling in love with a man who understood that wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with what you gave back to the world. The first warning sign came during Victoria's elaborate 35th birthday party at the Rainbow Room. October in Manhattan, 65 floors above the city, with views that made you feel like you owned the world. My parents had rented the entire venue, transformed it into what my mother called Versailles meets modern elegance. Whatever that meant. 200 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, and enough champagne to fill a swimming pool. I'd been dating James for 4 months, and the secret felt like carrying sunlight in my pocket. Every Tuesday and Thursday after our coffee shop meetings, we'd walk through Central Park talking about everything and nothing. He'd started leaving little notes in library books he knew I'd check out for my classroom. I'd begun bringing extra sandwiches to school, claiming I'd accidentally made too much lunch just to make sure he ate on days when he forgot to pack food because he'd been up until 3 a.m. creating special lesson plans for his struggling students. At Victoria's party, I was practically glowing. My cousin Emma noticed immediately, pulling me aside near the dessert table, a architectural marvel of French pastries that cost more than my monthly rent. "You look different, Sarah. Happy. Like actually happy. Not Mitchell family photo happy." That's when I made my mistake. Wine flushed and love drunk, I mentioned I was seeing someone. The words had barely left my mouth when my mother materialized beside us like she'd been summoned. Eleanor Mitchell had radar for family information that might affect our standing. "Someone we know, darling?" she asked, her champagne glass pausing midway to her lips. Her tone was honeyed but sharp, the voice she used when sizing up whether someone was worth her time. "From the Gardner wedding last month?" I noticed the Whitman boy was quite attentive. "No, Mom. Someone I met through work." The temperature around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Through work? Another administrator? Perhaps someone from the Board of Education?" I should have lied. Should have been vague. But I was tired of pretending. Tired of hiding the best thing in my life. "He's a teacher, Mom. History teacher at the high school near my school." My father's laugh cut through the orchestra music. He'd been hovering nearby, discussing stocks with Richard, but parent radar had drawn him in. Charles Mitchell threw his head back and laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite society titter, but a deep, dismissive laugh that made the other guests turn to stare. "Sarah's little hobby has found her a playmate," he announced to our gathering circle, loud enough that people 3 conversation clusters away could hear. "How quaint. Tell me, Princess, does this teacher friend know about your trust fund? Or is he under the impression that you're just another bleeding heart elementary school martyr?" Richard smirked into his whiskey. "Come on, Charles. Nothing wrong with a little rebellion. Remember when Victoria dated that drummer in college? These phases pass." "That was for 3 weeks," Victoria interjected, appearing at Richard's elbow in her custom Valentino gown. "And I was 19. Sarah's 25. There's a difference between rebellion and stupidity." She pulled me aside with practiced discretion, her manicured nails digging into my arm as she steered me toward the ladies' room. Once inside the opulent space, marble everything, orchids on every surface. She checked under the stalls before turning on me. "Please tell me you're not serious about this person." Her voice was low, urgent. "You know what's at stake here, don't you?" "What are you talking about?" Victoria studied me in the mirror, reapplying lipstick with mechanical precision. "God, you really don't know. Haven't you ever wondered why Christopher got cut off? Why Cousin Beth isn't invited to anything anymore?" Christopher was our father's nephew who'd married a nurse. Beth had chosen a carpenter over the investment banker our aunt had selected. I'd been told they'd moved away for work, lost touch naturally. "They broke the rules, Sarah. The trust fund rules. Grandmother's will. The family covenant. All of it." Marry beneath your station. Lose everything. Not just the money, Sarah. Everything. The family. The connections. The safety net you've taken for granted your entire life. That's medieval. This is 2017, not. This is the Mitchell family. Victoria interrupted, her voice hard. You think teaching is your cute little adventure? Fine. But don't drag some nobody into our world and expect Daddy to shake his hand at Sunday dinner. End it now, before anyone else finds out. Or what? Victoria's reflection smiled that cold smile I remembered from childhood. The one she wore when she told our parents I'd broken Mom's Waterford vase, when she'd hidden my acceptance letter to Columbia Teachers College, when she'd told me piano lessons were canceled, knowing I'd prepared for weeks for the recital. Or, you'll find out exactly how alone people can be when the Mitchell family decides they don't exist. I convinced myself Victoria was being dramatic. She'd always had a flair for theatrics, turning minor inconveniences into Shakespearean tragedies. This was the same sister who'd threatened to disown me when I'd worn a department store dress to her engagement party, who'd acted like the world was ending when I'd chosen Yale over Harvard. Surely she was exaggerating about the trust fund, about the family rules. This was 2017, not 1817. Families didn't actually disown children for marrying for love anymore. Besides, once they met James, everything would change. How could it not? He was brilliant, working on his principal certification while teaching full-time, had published papers on educational equity, spoke 3 languages fluently from teaching himself in libraries. He was kind, spending weekends tutoring kids for free, checking on elderly neighbors, coaching debate team without stipend because the school couldn't afford to pay him. He made me laugh until my sides hurt. Remembered every story about my students, had already started a college fund for children we didn't even have yet, putting away $50 each month from his meager salary because education is the only inheritance that matters. They're just protective, I told James 3 weeks after Victoria's party, as we painted my tiny studio apartment together. We'd decided on a soft yellow for the main wall. Sunshine for dark mornings, he'd said. He was getting more paint on himself than the walls, deliberate strokes across his nose that made him look like a warrior preparing for battle. My family's always been suspicious of outsiders. Once they see how happy you make me, everything will change. James set down his roller and wrapped his paint-speckled arms around me, leaving handprints on my old Yale shirt that I'd never wash out. Sarah, I need you to hear me. I don't need their approval. I don't need their acceptance. I just need you. But I could see the hurt flickering in his eyes when I described their reactions. This man who'd survived 15 foster homes, who'd been told he'd never amount to anything by countless adults who were supposed to protect him, who'd built himself from absolutely nothing into one of the best teachers in the city. He was being dismissed by people who'd never worked for anything in their lives, who'd inherited not just money, but the arrogance to believe that made them superior. I spent the next month building elaborate fantasies about how the introduction would go. We'd have them over for dinner. No, that wouldn't work. My apartment was too small. We'd meet at a neutral restaurant, somewhere nice but not stuffy. James would wear the blazer we'd found at the thrift store, the one that made him look like a professor. He'd talk about his research on closing achievement gaps, his plans for educational reform. My father would be impressed by his intelligence. My mother would appreciate his manners, the way he held doors and pulled out chairs, habits learned from the one foster mother who'd cared enough to teach him. Victoria would see how he looked at me like I hung the moon. I want to meet them, James said one evening as we corrected papers together on my couch, our feet intertwined, red pen marks bleeding across student essays. Not because I need their blessing, but because they're part of you. Even the complicated parts of your story matter to me. I kept making excuses. The timing wasn't right. Father was stressed about a merger. Mother was busy with the hospital gala. Victoria was dealing with Sophie's preschool applications. Next month, I promised, after the holidays, when things calmed down. But I was lying to both of us. Deep down, in the part of myself I didn't want to examine, I knew Victoria hadn't been exaggerating. I'd seen Christopher's abandoned golf clubs in the garage, his Harvard diploma still hanging in the guest bedroom of a house he'd never visit again. I'd noticed how Beth's name made my mother's jaw tighten, how her Christmas cards went straight into the trash unopened. Still, I chose denial. Love would conquer all. It had to. This wasn't a fairy tale where the princess had to choose between her prince and her kingdom. This was real life. My life. And I could have both. James was worth fighting for. Worth any risk. And my family, despite their flaws, loved me. They'd come around. I had to believe that. The alternative, that they'd choose their rules over their daughter, was unthinkable. So I didn't think about it. I painted yellow walls and graded papers and fell deeper in love, pretending the sword hanging over our heads was just a shadow, just a trick of the light, just another one of Victoria's dramatic exaggerations. I'd learn soon enough that sometimes the unthinkable is exactly what happens. 3 months before our wedding, I found the email that shattered my carefully constructed denial. It was a Thursday evening in March, unseasonably warm, and I'd stopped by my parents' house to borrow my mother's laptop for a presentation I was giving about education funding. She was at her book club, really an excuse for Greenwich wives to drink wine and gossip, and had told me to let myself in. The house was quiet, just the grandfather clock ticking in the foyer and the hum of central air. I found her MacBook in the study, that mahogany-paneled room where all the important Mitchell decisions had been made for 3 generations. The walls were lined with photographs. My great-grandfather with Roosevelt, my grandfather breaking ground on his first hotel, my father ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Her Gmail was still open. My mother, who lectured about internet security but used password 123 for everything. I was about to close it when I saw my name in a subject line, Sarah's situation, family meeting notes. My stomach dropped. I should have closed the laptop right then, should have respected the privacy my family had never given me. But Sarah's situation wasn't a phrase you used for happy news. My fingers moved without my permission, clicking the thread open. The email chain went back 2 months, to right after Victoria's birthday party. 15 family members were copied. My parents, Victoria and Richard, Uncle William from Boston, Aunt Catherine from Manhattan, cousins from Connecticut and Massachusetts, even my father's brother Thomas, who lived in London and barely acknowledged our existence except for obligatory Christmas cards. My father had initiated the chain with corporate efficiency. Family. As you may have heard through various channels, Sarah is involved with someone significantly beneath her station, a public school teacher with no family, no connections, and an annual salary that wouldn't cover our monthly household expenses. We need to address this situation before it progresses further. I've attached Grandmother Mitchell's trust documents highlighting the relevant clauses regarding inappropriate marriages and subsequent disinheritance. Please review and respond with your thoughts on how to proceed. The attachment was 40 pages of legal documentation I'd never seen before. Terms and conditions written in 1963 when my grandmother established the family trusts. Article 7, Section 3 was highlighted in yellow. Any beneficiary who marries beneath their social standing, as determined by the family board, shall forfeit all rights to trust distributions, inheritance, and family assets. This clause is irrevocable and extends to all future generations of the disinherited party. Victoria's response made my hands shake. Daddy, I spoke with Sarah at my party. She's completely infatuated. This isn't a passing phase. She actually believes this man is her future. I suggest we let her have her little rebellion. When she's struggling to pay rent on two teachers' salaries, eating ramen noodles and shopping at discount stores, she'll come crawling back. The real world has a way of crushing romantic delusions. We just need patience. Richard had added his own venomous contribution. The trust redistribution clause is clear. If Sarah forfeits her portion, it's divided among remaining beneficiaries. That's roughly 30 million split between Victoria and the cousins. I'm not suggesting we influence her decision, but we certainly shouldn't discourage her from her chosen path. Some people need to learn lessons the hard way. Uncle William, who'd taught me chess and called me his favorite niece, wrote, "This is unfortunate but necessary. The family standards exist for a reason. We can't have every generation thinking they can marry whoever they please. What next? A barista? An artist? Where would it end?" Sarah made her choice when she decided to play teacher in the Bronx. This is merely the natural conclusion. But it was my mother's response that broke something inside me. I've been thinking about this extensively. Perhaps losing her inheritance will teach Sarah the value of what she's throwing away. A teacher's salary won't pay for the lifestyle she's accustomed to, the medical care, the security, the opportunities. This James person is clearly after our money anyway. Men like that always are. They see a girl like Sarah, naive, privileged, rebellious, and they see a lottery ticket. When he realizes she's been cut off, he'll show his true colors. She'll be heartbroken, but wiser. Sometimes we must let our children fail to help them grow. I vote for complete disinheritance if she proceeds with this relationship. 73 emails followed, discussions of timing, strategy, legal procedures. They'd consulted lawyers, accountants, even a private investigator who'd run a background check on James. They knew about his foster care history, his student loans, his 12-year-old Honda Civic with the cracked windshield he couldn't afford to fix. They'd turned the man I loved into a spreadsheet of deficiencies, a problem to be solved, a threat to be eliminated. The confrontation happened at Sunday dinner, 3 days after I'd found the emails. I'd spent those days in a haze, teaching my third graders with a smile that felt like broken glass, meeting James for coffee and pretending everything was fine while rage built inside me like a storm. I printed every email, highlighting the worst parts with the same yellow marker I used for student achievements. 73 pages of betrayal, collated and stapled, a dissertation on how to destroy your daughter. That Sunday, I arrived early, placing the printed packets beside each place setting like the world's most devastating menu. The family portrait above the mantel, all of us in coordinated white and khaki on the beach at Martha's Vineyard, seemed to mock me. When had we become these people? When had bloodline become a business contract? They filed in with their usual practiced elegance, my father checking his phone for market updates, my mother adjusting the centerpiece by imperceptible degrees, Victoria complaining about traffic while Richard poured himself whiskey. Nobody noticed the papers until they sat down. The silence when they began reading was deafening. My mother's face went from confused to horrified to furious in 10 seconds. "How dare you go through my private correspondence? This is a complete violation of... How dare you plot against your own daughter?" I stood, my hands shaking but my voice steady as steel. "How dare you treat my life like a hostile takeover, like some corporate problem to manage? James doesn't even know about the trust fund. He's never asked about money, never wondered about this house, these cars, any of it. He loves me for me, something none of you seem capable of understanding." My father's voice was ice, controlled fury that had intimidated boardrooms and broken business partners. "Sit down, Sarah. You're being dramatic. These were private discussions about family concerns." "Family concerns?" I laughed, but it came out like breaking glass. "You hired a private investigator. You ran background checks on the man I love like he's some criminal. You discussed my inheritance like I was already dead to you. We were protecting you. My mother interjected, her pearls catching the light as she gestured. You don't understand how the world works. Men like James. Men like James work 16-hour days to give kids like him a chance at better lives. Men like James use their grocery money to buy calculators for students who can't afford them. Men like James volunteer at homeless shelters every Saturday morning while you're getting your hair done at Bergdorf's. Victoria laughed. Actually laughed, setting down her wine glass with deliberate precision. Oh, Sarah. Saint Sarah and her noble pauper. You're really choosing a high school teacher over your family? Over $30 million? Over everything we've built for generations? I'm choosing love over money. I'm choosing happiness over status. I'm choosing a man who stayed up all night helping me create individualized education plans for my struggling students over people who've never worked a real day in their lives. Richard leaned back in his chair, swirling his whiskey like we were discussing stock options. When the romance wears off and you're clipping coupons, shopping at Walmart, driving some beat-up car to your little teaching job, remember this moment. Remember you chose this. You're right, I said, looking at each of them. I am choosing. I'm choosing someone who sees my classroom victories as real accomplishments. I'm choosing someone who understands that wealth isn't what you have, it's what you give. I'm choosing someone who would love me if I had nothing, which is more than any of you can say about each other. My voice broke on the last word, years of suppressed truth spilling out. Do you even like each other? Or is this family just a business arrangement? Victoria, you married Richard for his portfolio. Mom, you collect charity committees like handbags. Dad, you haven't asked about my students once, not once, in 3 years. You don't even know their names, but James knows every single one. My father stood slowly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on glass. His face had turned that particular shade of purple that preceded his boardroom demolitions. If you marry this teacher, you're finished. No trust fund, no inheritance, no family. You'll be nobody. Nothing. Erased from every will, every document, every family event. Is that clear enough for you? Crystal clear? I picked up my purse, my mother's packet of emails clutched in my other hand. But here's what you don't understand. I'd rather be nobody with James than somebody in this family. My mother's voice cracked for the first time I could remember. Sarah, please. Don't throw your life away for some ridiculous infatuation. I'm not throwing my life away, I said from the doorway, turning for one last look at the family I was losing. I'm finally starting to live it. The last thing I heard was Victoria's voice, sharp and clear. When you come crawling back, and you will, don't expect us to be waiting. 2 weeks after the dinner confrontation, my cousin Emma called me at midnight, crying so hard I could barely understand her. Emma was the quiet one, the family observer who stayed silent at dinners but saw everything. She was also the only one who'd ever shown genuine interest in my teaching, sometimes sending gift cards for my classroom supplies. Sarah, I need to see you. Tonight. It's about your trust fund. It's so much worse than you know. We met at an all-night diner in Queens, halfway between our worlds. Emma looked haunted, clutching a manila folder like it contained nuclear codes. Her usually perfect makeup was smeared, her hands shaking as she pushed the folder across the sticky Formica table. I work for Uncle Thomas's law firm now, she began, voice barely above a whisper. I was filing documents last week when I found these. Sarah, they've been planning this since you started teaching. Inside the folder were documents dating back 3 years, meeting minutes from family board gatherings I'd never known existed, financial projections, legal strategies. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Look at page 12, Emma said, pointing to a highlighted section. Grandmother's will has a clause nobody talks about. If any grandchild marries inappropriately and gets disinherited, their portion doesn't just disappear. It gets redistributed among the remaining worthy heirs. Your 30 million would be split between Victoria, me, and the other cousins. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. But you're telling me this? Because I'm not a monster, Emma interrupted. But look at Victoria's emails to Richard from 2 years ago. The emails were damning. Victoria had identified me as the weak link the moment I'd started teaching. She'd called it Sarah's bleeding heart phase and convinced Richard that my eventual disinheritance would solve their financial problems. Because Richard's real estate empire, the one everyone praised at family dinners, was hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, over-leveraged properties, loans he couldn't pay without a massive cash infusion. They've been underwater for 18 months, Emma explained. Those renovations they brag about? Paid for with loans against future inheritance? The Hampton House? Second mortgage. Richard needs your 30 million to avoid bankruptcy. But the conspiracy went deeper. My parents weren't just passive participants. They were architects. My father had actually revised the family trust terms last year, making them even stricter. He'd added clauses about maintaining family reputation and appropriate social standing that were so vague they could disinherit anyone for almost anything. But I was the test case, the example that would keep other family members in line. There's more, Emma said, pulling out another document. They've already rewritten their wills, removing you completely. They did it 6 months ago, before you even met James. The moment you took the teaching job, you were done in their eyes. James just gave them the excuse they needed. The document was notarized, witnessed, ironclad. I wasn't just losing my trust fund. I was being systematically erased from the Mitchell family legacy. They'd even removed me from the family foundation board, a position I'd held since turning 21. My name had been scratched from future burial plots in the family mausoleum. They'd planned how to explain my absence at future events, crafting a story about me choosing a different path that made it sound mutual and civilized. But here's the worst part, Emma continued, her voice breaking. They've been spreading rumors in society circles, telling people you had a breakdown, that teaching was part of some mental health crisis. They're laying groundwork so when you're cut off, people will think they did it for your own good, like some kind of intervention. I found correspondence with their society friends, carefully crafted messages expressing concern about my deteriorating judgment and rebellious phase. My mother had told her book club I was going through something difficult and needed space to find herself. My father had informed his business partners that I was exploring alternative lifestyles with the kind of tone that suggested I'd joined a cult. They're not just cutting you off, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. They're rewriting history to make you the villain. So if you ever try to fight back or go public, you'll look like the crazy daughter who went off the rails, and they'll be the loving family who had to make tough choices. I stared at the papers, seeing my entire existence being strategically demolished by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. This wasn't just about money or James or family standards. This was about power, control, and Victoria's greed dressed up as family values. Why are you telling me this? I asked Emma. Because what they're doing is evil, she said simply, and because love, real love like what you have with James, is worth more than all their money combined. Run, Sarah. Run far and fast and don't look back. The night before my wedding, I sat alone in the empty venue, surrounded by 150 chairs that would remain vacant. The Riverside Gardens wasn't the plaza or the Rainbow Room. It was a modest space in Brooklyn that James and I could actually afford. But we'd transformed it with string lights and wildflowers into something magical. Or at least, it would have been magical if anyone was coming to witness it. The florist had already set up, insisting on completing the job even after I'd told her about the empty guest list. "Honey," she'd said, arranging white roses with practiced hands. You deserve beautiful flowers, whether it's 2 people or 200. James had insisted we keep everything perfect, even if no one came. We're not getting married for them, he'd said, but I could see the hurt in his eyes when he threw away the boutonniere he'd bought for my father. I traced my fingers over the hand-calligraphed place cards I'd spent weeks perfecting, each one a small monument to my naivety. Table 1. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Mitchell III. My parents, who'd raised me to believe love was conditional, that family was a business contract with terms and conditions. My father, who taught me to ride a bike but couldn't teach himself to love unconditionally. My mother, who'd sung me lullabies but now orchestrated my exile like a social execution. Table 2. Victoria and Richard Blackstone. My sister, who'd once held my hand during thunderstorms but now counted my inheritance like silver coins. Richard, who'd smiled at family dinners while calculating how my disinheritance would save his drowning empire. Table 3. Uncle William, who'd taught me chess, called me his favorite niece, snuck me butterscotch candies during boring family meetings, the same uncle who'd written that I needed to learn a lesson about family standards. Table 8. Grandmother Iris, 93 years old, the matriarch whose will started all of this. She'd sent a card. Disappointment doesn't begin to cover what I feel. 4 words. That's all I was worth to the woman who'd once told me I was the future of the Mitchell legacy. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the rejections, each one a perfectly crafted dagger. Regretfully declined due to prior commitments. The Weatherbys, who'd known me since birth. Unable to attend. Cousin Margaret, who I'd been bridesmaid for last year. Best wishes from afar. My godparents, who'd promised to always be there. The only acceptances were from my teaching colleagues, James's fellow teachers, and surprisingly, several of my students' families who'd insisted on coming despite my protests that it wasn't necessary. Maria's mother had called me crying. Miss M, you came to Maria's communion. We wouldn't miss your special day for anything. I called my mother one last time, knowing she wouldn't answer but needing to try. The voicemail beep felt like a flatline. Mom, it's me. Tomorrow I'm marrying the best man I've ever known. He spent his lunch money this week to buy me flowers because he knows I've been sad. He wrote his own vows 17 times because he wanted them perfect. He looks at me like I'm his whole universe, and he doesn't even know about the trust fund. Doesn't know what he's supposedly costing me. My voice cracked, tears falling onto my rehearsal dinner dress. Not designer, just something pretty from a department store that James said made me look like sunshine. Your granddaughters won't know you, but they'll know love. Real love. The kind that doesn't come with price tags or conditions or board approval. They'll grow up thinking family means showing up, not showing off. They'll never wonder if they're loved enough, successful enough, worthy enough. They'll just know they're enough, period. I paused, watching the moon through the venue windows, remembering how my mother used to point out constellations from my bedroom window, back when I believed she'd always be there. I'm sorry that wasn't enough for you. I'm sorry that James being brilliant and kind and dedicated doesn't matter because his parents were addicts who left him in the system. I'm sorry that my happiness is worth less than your social standing. But mostly, Mom, I'm sorry for you. Because tomorrow I'm marrying my best friend, and you're going to miss it. You're going to miss everything. My children's first words, their first steps, their graduation days. All because a bank account matters more than your daughter. James found me there at 2 a.m., still in my jeans and his old Columbia University sweatshirt, surrounded by place cards like paper ghosts. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me on the floor and held my hand while I sobbed for the family I'd thought I had, for the love that came with terms and conditions, for the little girl who used to believe her parents would always choose her. They're not coming, I whispered into his shoulder. None of them. I know, he said softly, kissing my forehead. But tomorrow, you're going to walk down that aisle and I'll be waiting for you. And that's all that matters. We're going to build our own family, Sarah. One that shows up. The morning of my wedding, I woke up different. The tears were gone, replaced by something harder, clearer, like steel forged in fire. Sunlight streamed through the window of our tiny apartment, illuminating the wedding dress hanging on the closet door. Not a designer gown, just something simple I'd found at a sample sale. But James had cried when he accidentally saw me trying it on last week. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in weeks. The woman staring back wasn't the Mitchell heiress anymore. The trust fund princess was dead. In her place stood someone I was only beginning to recognize, someone who'd chosen love over money, integrity over inheritance, truth over tradition. We're going to build something amazing, I told James as he shaved, my arms wrapped around his waist from behind. Without them, without their money, without their conditions, without their toxic legacy poisoning everything it touches. He turned, shaving cream still covering half his face, eyes searching mine. Sarah, are you sure? It's going to be hard, really hard. 2 teachers' salaries, student loans, no safety net. Hard? I laughed, and it wasn't bitter anymore, it was free. James, we're teachers. We already chose hard. We chose to spend our own money on classroom supplies. We chose to work 60-hour weeks for less than what my mother spends on a handbag. We chose to love kids everyone else has, written off. Hard is what we do. I wiped the shaving cream from his cheek, looking into the eyes of the man who'd chosen me when I came with nothing but myself. But now we're choosing it together. And you know what? They did us a favor. They showed us exactly who they are. No more pretending, no more hoping they'll change, no more Sunday dinners where I shrink myself to fit their expectations. You're not shrinking now, he said softly, pulling me closer. No, I agreed. I'm done shrinking. I'm done apologizing for choosing a life of purpose over profit. I'm done feeling guilty for loving someone who actually works for a living. They want to erase me? Fine. But I'm going to build something so beautiful, so meaningful, that their money will look like the Monopoly bills it really is. That afternoon, I married James in front of 40 people who actually loved us. My third graders were flower girls, throwing petals with chaotic enthusiasm. Jaden walked me down the aisle. This 8-year-old who'd struggled to read was now reading a poem he'd written just for us. James's foster mother, Mrs. Chen, sat in the front row crying happy tears, wearing the corsage that should have been my mother's. James's vows destroyed me. Sarah, you gave up a fortune to be with me, but you don't understand. You are my fortune. Every day you choose me is a day I'm the richest man alive. My vows were a promise and a battle cry. James, they said you were beneath me, but they had it backwards. You've elevated me to heights they can't even imagine, where worth isn't measured in dollars but in difference made, where wealth means how much you give, not how much you have. I choose you, I choose us, and I choose the life we're going to build. As we kissed, sealing our union, I heard Maria's mother whisper to someone, "That family that didn't come? They just missed the wedding of the century." She was right. My family missed everything that mattered, too busy counting money to see that love, real, working class, struggled for, chosen everyday love, was the only inheritance worth having. Walking back down that aisle as Mrs. Sarah Chen, I wasn't thinking about the $30 million I'd lost. I was thinking about the life I'd gained. The Mitchell fortune was gone, but I was just getting started on building my own wealth, the kind you can't deposit but that pays dividends forever. I didn't plan revenge. I planned success. While Victoria posted Instagram photos of charity galas and Richard pretended his properties weren't bleeding money, James and I got to work building something real from nothing but determination. The first year, we lived on $60,000 combined, in a one-bedroom apartment where the radiator clanged like a ghost, and the walls were so thin we could hear our neighbors' TV shows. I tutored wealthy kids on weekends. The irony wasn't lost on me, teaching SAT prep to teenagers from my old world who had no idea I used to be one of them. Every dollar went to law school applications. James studied for his principal certification by streetlight when our electricity got shut off because we'd chosen groceries over the utility bill. "Document everything," James said one night, creating a spreadsheet on his ancient laptop. "Every achievement, every milestone, every promotion. Not for them, for us, to remember how we built this." So we did. I photographed my LSAT score, 95th percentile, studied in the public library because we couldn't afford prep courses. James recorded his certification ceremony, youngest person in the program by 5 years. We saved every acceptance letter, every scholarship notice, every small victory that proved we didn't need trust funds to build something meaningful. I went to law school at night while teaching during the day, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and pure spite. James became assistant principal within 18 months, transforming the worst-performing department into a model of excellence. His methods got attention, first local newspapers, then education journals, then speaking invitations. Year 3, I graduated law school summa cum laude. The same week, James was offered the principal position at one of the most challenging schools in the district. They wanted someone young, innovative, hungry. The salary, $80,000. We celebrated with champagne from the corner store, drinking it from coffee mugs in our still tiny apartment, planning our future on napkins. Year 5, I opened my own practice specializing in education law, fighting for underfunded schools, protecting teachers from arbitrary terminations, ensuring special needs students got services. My first major case made headlines when I got a $30 million judgment against a district that had systematically denied services to low-income disabled students. The same amount as my lost trust fund, cosmic justice with interest. James's programs caught national attention. His Every Child Thrives initiative, implemented with no budget through creative community partnerships, improved test scores by 40% in 2 years. The Department of Education invited him to speak. Then came the call that changed everything. The White House wanted him on a national education reform committee. Meanwhile, I monitored my family's social media and society pages, like studying an opponent's chess moves. Richard's properties started appearing in foreclosure listings. Victoria's posts shifted from her mess bags to minimalism and finding meaning beyond materialism, code for "we're broke, but trying to save face." My parents quietly sold the vacation homes, claiming they wanted to simplify. We saved every article about our successes. James featured in Education Week, "The Principal Who Proves Poverty Isn't Destiny." My profile in the American Bar Association Journal, From Classroom to Courtroom. The Lawyer, Fighting for Educational Equity. We didn't send these to my family. We didn't need to. Greenwich society is small. They knew. They watched from afar as we built the kind of success that couldn't be inherited, only earned. The plan was never revenge. It was proof. Proof that love multiplies while greed divides. Proof that 2 teachers with nothing but determination could build more than trust fund babies ever could. 7 years after my wedding, my phone rang at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years but could never forget. Victoria. My hand hovered over the phone as it rang. James was in the shower, getting ready for a district-wide presentation. Our daughters, Emily, 6, and Grace, 4, were still asleep. curled up like kittens in their shared bedroom of our modest but loved colonial in Westchester. We'd bought it last year with our own money, every penny earned, not inherited. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello, Victoria." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, a voice I barely recognized, hollow, desperate, nothing like the sister who'd once commanded every room she entered. "Sarah, I need to see you. Please. It's... I need your help." We agreed to meet at the Grounded Bean, the same coffee shop where James and I had fallen in love. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I arrived early, choosing the corner table where James had once graded papers, where we'd planned our wedding, where we'd decided to start trying for children. When Victoria walked in, I had to look twice. The sister who'd never worn the same outfit twice stood before me in a simple dress I recognized from Target's fall collection. Her face, always perfectly contoured and highlighted, was bare except for drugstore mascara. Her hands, those perfectly manicured hands that had once gestured dismissively at my life choices, trembled as she held a manila folder. "You look," I started. "Poor?" She laughed bitterly, sliding into the seat across from me. "That's one word for it." She ordered water. Just water. The barista, who knew me as a regular, offered her a free pastry, any friend of Sarah's. But Victoria declined with the kind of embarrassed gratitude I recognized from my students' parents, who couldn't afford extras. "Richard left me 6 months ago," she said without preamble. "Took what was left of the money, which wasn't much, and disappeared to Costa Rica with his 23-year-old assistant. The divorce lawyer says I'll get nothing. He moved all our assets offshore months before he left. Maybe years. I was too busy playing society wife to notice I was married to a con artist." She slid the folder across to me. Inside were court documents, bank statements showing overdrafts, credit card bills stamped "past due" in red ink that seemed to scream across the coffee shop. "But there's more," Ian continued, her voice dropping. "Mom and Dad are broke too. They reverse mortgaged the Greenwich house to invest in Richard's sure thing developments. The family trust, all those millions grandmother left. Richard convinced them to invest it all. He had PowerPoints, profit projections, guarantees. They gave him everything, Sarah. Everything." The weight of it settled between us like a physical presence. The Mitchell fortune, 4 generations of wealth, gone. "The house goes to auction next month," Victoria whispered. "Mom's been selling her jewelry to buy groceries. Dad had a mild heart attack last week. Stress, the doctors say. They don't have insurance anymore. They couldn't afford the premiums." She pulled out another paper. An eviction notice dated 2 weeks from now. "This is for my apartment. Sophie and I have been staying with different friends, a few nights here and there. But Sarah..." Her voice broke completely. "I need to borrow $50,000. Not for me. For Sophie. School, stability. Just enough to get us through while I figure something out." I looked at this woman who'd chosen money over family, who'd celebrated my disinheritance because it meant more for her. "You know what James makes now?" I asked quietly. "You know James makes $120,000 now as principal?" I said, watching Victoria's eyes widen with desperate hope. "That I make $200,000 at my firm? Sarah, please. We have savings, investments, college funds for our girls." I pulled out my phone, showing her photos of Emily and Grace at their dance recital last week, wearing tutus that cost $40, not $400. "They're 6 and 4 now. You've never met them." Victoria's face crumbled. "I know. I know what we did. What I did. Sarah, I was wrong. Do you remember what you said when I told you I was marrying James?" I kept my voice level, professional, the tone I used in courtrooms. "You said, 'Why would you choose someone so beneath us?' Do you remember what Dad texted me on my wedding day?" You're marrying beneath your station. Don't contact us when you're desperate. The blood drained from her face as she recognized her own words being fed back to her. Ask someone beneath you for help, Victoria. I stood gathering my things. Oh, wait. According to your standards, there's no one beneath a divorced, broke, single mother, is there? But then I did something that changed everything. I sat back down. Sophie doesn't deserve to suffer for your choices, I said, watching tears stream down Victoria's face. So here's my offer. I'll pay for Sophie's education, directly to the school. I'll ensure she has what she needs: clothes, food, stability. But you get nothing from me except the chance to rebuild yourself the way James and I did, from zero, with work, with humility. Victoria nodded frantically, mascara running in black rivers. Yes, anything. Thank you. I'm not done. I pulled out my own folder. I'd come prepared, somehow knowing this day would arrive. I've been investigating Richard's company for 2 years. Did you know he's been laundering money through those developments? That the FBI has been building a case? Her mouth fell open. My law practice includes forensic accounting now. Funny how skills compound when you actually work for them. I have enough evidence to ensure Richard doesn't just lose in divorce court. He goes to federal prison. The FBI raid happens next week. I've been consulting with them for months. You did this? No, Victoria. Richard did this. I just made sure justice would find him. I slid a business card across the table. This is Agent Martinez. Call her. Cooperate fully. There's a whistleblower reward. Could be several million if you provide the right information. Enough to rebuild if you're smart about it. But you'll earn every penny by helping put your ex-husband behind bars. The twist went deeper. One more thing. Emma called me last night. Grandmother Iris, the one who wrote those trust conditions. She's been in a nursing home for 3 years with dementia. The trust documents were modified after her diagnosis. Guess who had power of attorney? Victoria's eyes widened. Richard? And Dad. They changed the terms together, made them stricter, ensured I'd be disinherited. It was never about grandmother's wishes. It was about greed. Richard needed my portion to stay afloat. Dad needed to feel powerful. They conspired to cut me off before I even met James. I stood again. This time for real. The FBI knows about that too. Turns out, fraudulent modification of trust documents is a federal crime. Dad won't go to prison. He's cooperating. But the shame? The social destruction? That's justice enough. The last thing I said before leaving. Victoria, Sophie can come stay with us while you figure things out. Because unlike our family, I don't abandon children for their parents' sins. But you get to learn what we learned. That rock bottom is just another foundation to build on. The only question is, what will you build? Sophie lived with us for 14 months while Victoria rebuilt her life from scratch. Watching my niece bloom in our chaotic, loving household was like watching a flower finally get sunlight. She shared a room with Emily and Grace, helped James with his lesson plans, and called me Aunt Sarah with the kind of genuine affection I'd never heard from a Mitchell before. Victoria got that receptionist job at the medical clinic, $15 an hour. No benefits at first. She lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat, took the bus to work, learned to cook with food pantry ingredients. I'd see her sometimes at the grocery store, comparing prices with the calculator app on her phone, and barely recognize the woman who once spent $500 on lunch without blinking. But she was learning, growing, becoming. Richard got 12 years in federal prison for money laundering, wire fraud, and tax evasion. The FBI raid made national news. Real estate mogul's empire built on lies, with photos of him in handcuffs splashed across the same society pages that once celebrated his wealth. Victoria's testimony was crucial. The whistleblower reward came through, $3.2 million. She could have lived comfortably on it, But she surprised everyone. She used half to pay back the people Richard had swindled. Small investors who'd trusted him with their retirement funds. The rest went into a trust for Sophie's education and a small fund for her own teaching degree. Yes, Victoria became a teacher. 3rd grade, just like I'd started. My parents' fall was quieter but complete. The Greenwich mansion sold at auction for a fraction of its value. They moved to a 1-bedroom condo in Florida, living on Social Security and my father's small pension, the only thing protected from Richard's fraud. The society friends disappeared overnight. The club memberships revoked. The charity boards found sudden reasons for their resignation. But something beautiful happened in that humid Florida condo. Stripped of everything that had defined them, my parents found each other again. My mother started painting, something she'd abandoned 40 years ago for the proper Mitchell wife role. My father volunteered at a local literacy program, teaching adults to read. They came to Emily's 8th birthday party last year, taking the train because they couldn't afford flights. My mother brought a homemade cake, lopsided but made with love, decorated with grocery store frosting. My father sat on our back deck, watching James teach the kids soccer, and said quietly, "I was so wrong, Sarah. He's the son-in-law I never deserved." "We were protecting the wrong things," my mother added, tears streaming. "We protected money that evaporated anyway. We should have protected love." Victoria called me crying after her first parent-teacher conference. "The parents trust me with their babies, Sarah. They thank me for caring. One mother brought me homemade tamales because she knows I skip lunch to help her son with reading. Is this how you felt? Like you mattered?" "Every single day," I told her. The Mitchell family fortune was gone, but something richer had replaced it. Sunday dinners at our house were loud, messy, filled with teachers and students' families, social workers and shop owners. No staff, no sterling silver, no talk of stock portfolios, just Emily showing off her science project, Grace performing improvised dance routines, Sophie helping James plan next week's assembly. Victoria brought her boyfriend last month, an EMT named Marcus who makes her laugh until she cries, who doesn't know or care about her past, who loves her for the teacher she's become. My parents joined us via FaceTime from Florida, my father wearing a volunteer badge from the Literacy Center, my mother's latest painting visible in the background. "To family," James toasted, raising a glass of the same corner store champagne we'd drunk as newlyweds. "The kind you choose, and the kind that chooses to change." We clinked glasses, mismatched, collected from yard sales, and I realized the Mitchell family hadn't ended. It had been reborn. Standing in my backyard last Sunday, I watched 4 generations of the new Mitchell family share a potluck dinner. No catering staff circulating with silver trays, no place cards designating hierarchy, no discussions of stock portfolios or social standings. Just my father pushing Grace on the swing he'd helped James build, his hands now calloused from volunteer construction work instead of manicured for board meetings. My mother teaching Emily to paint watercolors on newspaper because canvas was expensive, but creativity was free. Victoria helping Marcus serve the casserole she'd learned to make from a YouTube video, proud of every imperfect layer. Sophie stood to make a toast. 17 now, headed to State University on a full scholarship she'd earned through her own merit, not family connections. 7 years ago, I lost the family I knew, but I gained something better, a family that knows what actually matters. Aunt Sarah and Uncle James taught me that beneath and above are just directions on a map, not measures of human value. My family didn't come to my wedding because I married beneath me, a teacher making $48,000 who'd grown up in foster care. They never imagined that teacher would become a principal changing thousands of lives, making triple what they'd mocked. They never thought I'd become a lawyer earning more than Richard ever honestly did, fighting for kids like James used to be. They never imagined their beneath-us son-in-law would be invited to the White House to advise on education policy while Richard sat in federal prison. But here's what I learned. They thought a teacher making $48,000 couldn't be family. But they never understood that family isn't about what you make. It's about what you make of others. James didn't just teach history. He gave kids without history a future. I didn't just teach third grade. I taught children deemed unteachable that they were brilliant. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success that redefines the terms entirely. We didn't climb their ladder. We built our own. And when their ladder collapsed under the weight of greed and lies, ours was the only one still standing, strong enough to hold even those who'd tried to kick us off. My sister asked to borrow money, and I told her to ask someone beneath her. But then I showed her the truth. There's no such thing as beneath when everyone's building up, instead of tearing down. Victoria learned it teaching kids whose parents work 3 jobs but still show up to every school play. My parents learned it, serving soup to people who'd lost everything, just like they had. Even Sophie learned it, tutoring foster kids like James once was, seeing brilliance where others saw beneath. The Mitchell fortune is gone. Every trust fund, every investment, every symbol of old money superiority. But the Mitchell legacy? That's just beginning. It lives in every student James lifts up, every family I defend in court, every child Victoria teaches to read, every adult my father helps find literacy, every painting my mother creates from her soul instead of her status. Family isn't blood or bank accounts. Family is showing up when it's hard, choosing love when everyone says choose money, teaching your children that worth comes from what you give, not what you're given. They said I married beneath me. They were right. I married so far beneath their shallow values that I broke through to something deeper, where love multiplies instead of divides, where wealth means how many you lift instead of how high you climb, where the only thing beneath anyone is the solid ground we stand on together. What would you do if you were in her place? Tell us in the comments.